What happens when America's country music queen goes head-to-head with late-night television's golden boy? What should have been a lighthearted interview suddenly became one of the most explosive TV moments of the year. Tonight, we're breaking down the confrontation that left millions glued to their screens, and the entire entertainment industry buzzing. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit subscribe and drop a comment below with your thoughts on what really triggered this clash. The stage was set on The Tonight Show, starring Jimmy Fallon. It was supposed to be routine. Reba McEntire, the undisputed queen of country, was there to plug her new album, tease upcoming tour dates, and maybe trade a few laughs with Jimmy. The studio was packed. The cameras rolled. The atmosphere felt perfectly ordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incredible, the legendary Reba McEntire. Jimmy's voice boomed as the theme music hit. Reba emerged in a flowing burgundy dress, her trademark red hair glowing under the lights. A wave, a smile, the audience roaring. It was the image of a seasoned star who'd conquered both country music and Broadway. Jimmy rose from behind his desk, arms open wide. "Reba, welcome back. You look fantastic. How are you feeling?" "I'm doing wonderful, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me," she replied, settling into the chair with her famous warm smile. Everything seemed normal. Jimmy praised the new album, held up the cover for the cameras, and asked about the inspiration. Reba leaned forward, eyes bright. "This record's about authenticity. Real stories, real emotions, real people. Music should connect us, not divide us." The crowd nodded along. Jimmy did too, at first. But then he pivoted. "And speaking of authenticity," he said, "there's been a lot of talk about country artists and their political views. How that impacts their music and their fans. What are your thoughts?" The shift was subtle but immediate. Reba's smile cooled. She paused before answering. "I've always believed music should bring people together, not drive them apart. My job is to entertain, to tell stories that resonate, no matter what someone believes." Jimmy pressed. "But don't artists have a responsibility to speak out? You've got such a massive platform. Shouldn't you use it to make a difference?" Reba straightened in her chair, her tone tightening. "I've been doing this for over 40 years, and I've learned, telling people what to think or how to vote isn't respecting them. My fans are smart. They don't need me preaching at them." The tension thickened. Jimmy leaned in again, his smile still there but sharper now. "Sure, but what about issues that aren't political? Climate change, social justice, equality. Aren't those just human issues?" The audience stirred. Reba's warmth gave way to steel. "With respect, Jimmy, you're oversimplifying. Life isn't black and white. There are good people with different perspectives, and they deserve to be heard too." But Jimmy didn't back off. "Still," he insisted, "when it comes to basic human rights, don't you think you have a moral obligation to stand up? Your fans trust you?" Reba's answer cut through the air, firm and unflinching. "And that's exactly why I don't abuse that trust. They don't come to my concerts for politics. They come to feel connected, to escape the noise for a while. That's what music is supposed to do." For a second, it seemed like Jimmy might let it go. He leaned back, took a breath. But then he delivered the line that lit the fuse. "I just find it interesting," he said, "that someone with your platform chooses to stay neutral on issues that affect so many people. Some might say, that's a privilege not everyone can afford." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. The audience froze, breaths caught in their throats. Reba's eyes narrowed, and in that instant, the warmth that had charmed millions gave way to something harder, something forged from a lifetime of fighting for her place in a male-dominated industry. "Jimmy," she said slowly, her tone flat but laced with warning, "I need you to stop right there." Jimmy blinked, his grin faltering. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'm just asking the kinds of questions I think people at home want to hear." "No," Reba cut in, her voice tight, controlled. You're not asking questions. You're making accusations. You're implying that because I don't shout my politics into a microphone, I'm failing my fans. That's not curiosity, Jimmy. That's arrogance. And frankly, it's insulting. The studio went deathly still. This wasn't late-night banter anymore. This was a collision course. Reba, I think you're misunderstanding me. Jimmy tried, his voice edging toward defensive. I have nothing but respect for you. I'm just saying that sometimes, in times like these, silence can be... As what? Reba's voice cracked like a whip. Cowardice. Complicity? Let me tell you something about silence, Jimmy. Sometimes silence is wisdom. Sometimes it's respecting people's right to think for themselves. And sometimes it's knowing when to keep your mouth shut, instead of lecturing people you don't even understand. The tension was suffocating. Jimmy shifted in his seat, suddenly without his trademark wit, his producers no doubt panicking behind the glass. But Reba wasn't finished. Her voice grew stronger, resonant, the same voice that had commanded the Grand Ole Opry and Broadway alike. You want to talk about privilege? She said, her tone now ringing with steel. Privilege is sitting behind that desk in $1 million studio, wearing designer suits, surrounded by a team that feeds you every word, and then having the gall to lecture a woman who's fought tooth and nail for 40 years about moral responsibility. Jimmy's cheeks burned red. Reba, you're taking this too personally. I'm not attacking you, I'm just... You're just what? She snapped, her Oklahoma drawl sharpening. Just doing your job? Just asking tough questions? Tell me, Jimmy, when was the last time you sat across from someone who disagreed with you politically? When was the last time you spoke to a farmer in Iowa, or a factory worker in Michigan, or a single mother in Alabama, and actually listened to them, instead of telling them what to believe? Jimmy's reply was weak, almost mechanical. I talk to people from all walks of life. My show represents everyone. We welcome all viewpoints. Reba let out a laugh with no trace of humor. Your show? Your show is a liberal echo chamber dressed up as comedy. You and your writers mock half the country night after night, and then you wonder why they feel alienated. You want to know why there's division in America? Look in the mirror. The cameras caught every beat of it. The control room might have been screaming for a commercial break, but there was no stopping it now. That's unfair, Jimmy snapped, his nice guy mask finally slipping. We make fun of everyone. That's comedy. That's the job. And honestly, Reba, I think you're being a little hypersensitive here. The word detonated like dynamite. Reba's eyes darkened, her voice dropping to a razor-thin whisper that cut through the silence. Hypersensitive, she repeated, every syllable deliberate. Did you just call me hypersensitive for standing up for my fans and my values? I didn't mean it like that, Jimmy stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. I just think maybe you're overreacting to what was meant to be a friendly conversation. Friendly conversation? Reba rose from her chair, the movement alone commanding the stage. Towering now beside Jimmy's desk, she looked every bit the veteran who had outlasted decades of storms. Her voice was calm but carried a sting that silenced the audience. Jimmy, there was nothing friendly about what you just did. You invited me here under the pretense of promoting my music, and then you blindsided me with a political interrogation designed to corner me. That's not a conversation, that's a setup. Jimmy pushed back, his tone rising. Nobody ambushed you. These are legitimate questions your fans deserve answers to. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe interviews aren't for you. The crowd audibly gasped. A line had been crossed, but Reba didn't shout. Instead, she went still, her eyes hard, her voice cutting through the silence. Tough questions? She repeated slowly, with a force that froze Jimmy in place. Jimmy, I've been fielding tough questions since before you were old enough to stay awake for this show. I've been grilled about my divorce, my business decisions, my parenting. I've faced executives who told me I was too old, too strong-willed. I've performed through grief that would have broken lesser people. So don't you dare suggest I can't handle tough questions." Jimmy leaned forward, emboldened by desperation. "Then answer them. If you're so tough, if you're so experienced, stop dodging and give people straight answers about where you stand." "The issues that matter to who?" Reba shot back, her voice echoing across the studio. "To you? To your Manhattan writer's room? To the people who live in your bubble and think they know what's best for everyone else? My fans care about their families, their jobs, their communities. They care about music that speaks to their lives. They don't need me to spoon-feed them political slogans." Jimmy pressed harder, almost recklessly. "But surely you have opinions. Surely you care about the planet, about justice, about the future. How can you just stand by as if none of it matters?" "I never said it doesn't matter," Reba snapped, her patience cracking. "What I said is that it's not my job to be your political puppet. It's not my job to parrot Hollywood talking points. My job is to make music that heals and unites. If you can't see the value in that, then maybe you have no business interviewing artists." The audience erupted in murmurs, the tension thick enough to choke on. But Jimmy, red-faced and unraveling, doubled down. "Reba, art has always been political. Look at the folk singers of the 60s, the protest anthems. Look at artists who agreed with your politics." Reba cut in with surgical precision. "Jimmy, you don't get to dictate what art should be. You don't get to lecture me on the history of country music, a genre you've only ever acknowledged when it suits your narrative." The band sat frozen, their instruments silent. No jokes, no laughter, only raw, unfiltered conflict. "I respect country music." Jimmy fired back defensively. "I've had plenty of country artists here." "Respect?" Reba's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You just spent 10 minutes trying to shame me for not towing your political line. You implied I'm failing my fans, that I'm privileged, that I'm hypersensitive, that I can't handle tough questions. If that's your definition of respect, I'd hate to see what disrespect looks like." Jimmy shifted uncomfortably, cornered. Instead of apologizing, he reached for escape. "Look, Reba, you're taking this way too personally. Maybe we should just agree to disagree and move on to your tour dates." The condescension in his tone was the final nail. Reba turned to him slowly, her expression a mixture of disbelief, disgust, and cold disappointment. "Taking it too personally?" she repeated, shaking her head. Reba leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of Jimmy's desk, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Civilized conversation? Don't you dare hide behind that phrase now. You lost the right to call this civilized the moment you turned this interview into a spectacle at my expense." Jimmy swallowed hard, his attempt at a smile faltering under the weight of her fury. "Reba, please. I think you're misinterpreting." "Misinterpreting," she snapped, her voice rising now, echoing in the hushed studio. "No, Jimmy, I'm interpreting this exactly as it is. You don't want a conversation. You want a confrontation you can control. You want a headline? You want me to play into your little circus act so you can sit behind that desk and smirk while the audience claps on cue." The crowd remained frozen, torn between pity for Jimmy and awe at Reba's command of the room. Jimmy opened his mouth again, but Reba didn't give him the chance. She straightened, her presence towering, her voice lowering to a calm that was somehow even more devastating. "I came here in good faith to share my music, my work, my heart, and instead I walked into an ambush designed to belittle me and to reduce decades of artistry to a political soundbite. That is not civilized, Jimmy. That is not respect. And it is certainly not good television." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Then, with the kind of grace only a legend could summon, Reba turned to the audience, her expression softening for the first time all night. "Thank you all for your kindness. I'm truly grateful for my fans, for the love you've given me all these years. That's who I sing for. That's who I'll always sing for." She looked back at Jimmy, her eyes narrowing one final time. "But I will never again sing for this." With that, Reba unhooked her microphone, placed it deliberately on the desk in front of him, and walked off stage to a standing ovation so thunderous it rattled the rafters. Jimmy sat frozen at his desk, pale and speechless, while the cameras kept rolling. For once in his career, the king of late night had nothing, absolutely nothing, to say. Civilized? Reba's voice rose to its full power now, filling the studio with the kind of presence that had commanded stages around the world. "There's nothing civilized about what you've done here tonight, Jimmy. You've shown complete disrespect for me, for my fans, and for the very concept of honest dialogue. You've proven that you're nothing more than a bully with a television show who thinks his platform gives him the right to attack anyone who doesn't march in lockstep with his political agenda." Jimmy was now visibly sweating, his famous composure completely shattered. "Reba, please. I think you're overreacting here. This is just a friendly debate between two people who obviously care about this country." "Friendly?" Reba shook her head in disgust. "Jimmy, there was nothing friendly about this. From the moment you started your interrogation, you came into this interview with an agenda. And when I didn't give you the sound bites you wanted, you decided to try to bully and shame me into compliance. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in showing your true colors to millions of people." She began unclipping her microphone, each movement deliberate, controlled, but radiating fury. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? You had a chance to have a genuine conversation with someone who has lived through 5 decades of American history, who has seen this country and this industry change in ways you can't even imagine. You could have learned something. Your audience could have learned something. Instead, you turned it into a political ambush because you thought it would make for good television." "Reba, please don't do this," Jimmy pleaded, his voice cracking as he finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding. "Let's just take a breath and start over. We can edit this. We can edit this." Reba let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Oh no, Jimmy. You wanted good television. You wanted real emotions and real conversations. Well, this is what real looks like. This is what happens when you disrespect someone who has earned the right to be treated with dignity and courtesy." She placed her microphone carefully on the chair she had been sitting in and turned her gaze directly into the camera, addressing the audience both in the studio and at home. "To the wonderful people who came here tonight, expecting to see a fun interview about music and entertainment, I apologize that you had to witness this. You deserve better. You deserve hosts who celebrate artists instead of attacking them, who bring people together instead of driving them apart." Then she turned back to Jimmy, her voice carrying the full weight of her disappointment. "And as for you, Jimmy, I hope someday you learn the difference between asking tough questions and being a bully. I hope you learn that respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you have to earn. And most importantly, I hope you learn that the people watching your show aren't your political pawns. They're human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity." With that, Reba McEntire turned on her heel and walked toward the exit, her head held high and her dignity intact, despite everything that had just transpired. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud or simply process what they had just witnessed. Jimmy sat behind his desk, his face a mask of shock and embarrassment, clearly at a loss for how to salvage what had become the most disastrous interview in late-night television history. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of his humiliation as one of country music's greatest stars walked out of his studio and out of his show. As Reba reached the exit, she paused for just a moment and looked back over her shoulder. "Jimmy," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. "Next time you want to have a political debate, invite a politician. When you invite an artist, try showing some respect for what we do and why we do it." And with that, she was gone. leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and a host whose reputation would never quite recover from the night he tried to take on the Queen of Country Music, and learned exactly why she had earned that title through decades of grace, strength, and unwavering integrity. The aftermath of this explosive confrontation has continued to reverberate throughout the entertainment industry, with fans and critics alike weighing in on what many are calling one of the most dramatic moments in television history. What did you think of Reba's response? Was she right to walk out, or should she have stayed and tried to work things out with Jimmy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest moments in entertainment. This is definitely a story that will be talked about for years to come.